So, Amy, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Oh, I really wish I was where you are, Sam.
So, for those of you listening, I'm sitting in the Algarve right now. So, I've got a beautiful blue sky and swimming pool behind me, and Amy can see that. So, so I apologize. I don't have all my fancy podcasting tech here. So, if you hear background noises and neighbors and cars going by, I apologize in advance. But hopefully, we're quite remote where we are. So, it's great to see you, Amy.
Oh, it's fantastic. Thank you
So,
for having me on.
You're very welcome. So let's start by talking about how we met, shall we? Because there is a LinkedIn link to our meeting, isn't there?
Yeah, it's pretty cool, actually. So I was sat in an airport waiting for my delayed plane, and I thought, well, perfect time to get your book out. So I had been recommended your book on a mastermind, and I was reading it on half term, and I finished it. And as I was reading it, it said in there to reach out to you to connect. Did that, but also to go along to a professional speaking association, and I did that too. I booked my ticket there and then in the airport, and that has taken me on an incredible journey. But the journey we had with you was a really interesting one, because at the time I was working for another business, and so I thought, well, I had a podcast and I thought I'd get you on the show. And having had the sort of the to's and fro's after tagging you in and saying what a wonderful book it was and how excited I was to apply all your tips, I then thought, oh, even better, I could ask Sam to come on my show. Yeah, well, I had to fill in a very long form to get Sam on my show. and it was for the Property Vault podcast. And then on that day, the 3rd of April, that show was no more. And so that very first call that I had with you in person on Zoom was a case of, oh, Sam, you know that really long form that I filled in with all those stats that I could pre-qualify your time with? That show is no longer in existence. Is it okay that I bring you on a new show which has no audience and has zero listeners and hasn't even been launched yet? And you said yes. My goodness, that was a lot of trust, but that's because we built up a little bit of a relationship beforehand.
That's right. And that's, I guess, relationships is what LinkedIn's all about, right? So
yeah.
So what a journey. I love it. And I love that you're so involved in the Professional Speaking Association now. So congratulations on your roles there. And it's fantastic to have seen your journey since we got together all those years ago. So I've got quite a few things I want to talk to you about, because you're quite a prolific podcaster yourself. So I feel a little bit inferior, interviewing such an amazing podcaster. So I'm going to get you to share today some tips, if that's okay, on how you have used LinkedIn and social selling to kind of really elevate your podcast. We'll come on to that later on. But before we get into kind of that side of things and LinkedIn, I'd really like to just understand a little bit more about who you are and where you've come from, a bit about your own business journey.
Well, yes, I'm going to try and keep this really short. So basically, I came straight out of university and went into recruitment, and that was great. But then, whilst I wanted to stay in it, having children and working in recruitment was just too much. It was a full-on job, and I wanted to be a parent that was at home, and I had the opportunity to do that. So I was at home for a long time, between 2003 and 2014 with the children. I went back to work in 2016. And I was working part-time, although part-time just doesn't seem to exist when you're working in a startup. So that was a bit of an induction to fire. But what I realized was that my husband was really struggling, and I could see that he was working in a city, working crazy hours. He'd been in his job for a long time, and it just wasn't serving him very well. Mentally, physically, emotionally, he was exhausted, and I knew something had to change. So I did quit my job, and I educated myself and went through a journey for understanding how to invest in property. And I built up a portfolio in 3 years that enabled him to retire from his job. So I was pretty focused, on doing that and making sure that it was an opportunity that I saw I was able to realize for us, and our whole family dynamic has changed since then. And then I started to sort of think, well, if I can do this, I can help other people. And so that's what I did. And I was working in property training with another business partner. And at the beginning of lockdown, he decided he wanted to go in a different direction. And that's where all things changed for me, really. And it was a case of overnight, I had this network event that I'd been running. I had an audience from the podcast with the Property Vault podcast, and I'd been running trainings and mentoring one-to-ones. And I was like, well, what do I do now? What do I do? And when I looked at what I loved doing, it was the life purpose. It was the reason why I'd been doing what I was doing that I could sort of really push from and help others to focus with. And that's where Focus on Why came in. And yeah, that was the beginning of April 2020. And as they say, the rest has been history. It's just been totally in my flow, absolutely loving what I'm doing. So podcasting and life purpose coaching is where I am now.
Okay, so I'm curious, Amy, tell me what kind of lessons you've learned, because that's like quite a mad journey, isn't it? So give me top 3 things that you've learned through that business journey.
That life is not set, that you can choose to be who you want to be at any point in life, and that if you really want something, you go for it and you focus on it. And for me, it was a case of not a midlife crisis, but midlife beginnings. And I massively advocate midlife beginnings, and looking at all the different areas of my life and seeing how they all fold into one. So to make sure that I'm healthy, because being healthy makes a massive difference on how I approach other things in life. And it's just been a case of life is, when I say not set, it means that you don't have to follow the way that has been done before. You can buck the trend, you can go against the flow. And there I had been, my husband and I, we'd been paying off our mortgage, we'd been following the way and had our retirement dates, and it's like, what are we doing? This is not right. And having educated myself in personal development, in becoming much more financially literate, and understanding more about how I could maximize and leverage the savings that we had, and invest them in different ways to give us a passive income, was just a game changer for us. So there have been a lot of lessons.
I love that. Midlife beginnings. I think I'm having one of them myself. I love it. I love it. So talk to me about when and how you discovered LinkedIn. What was when did you first come across LinkedIn as a platform?
Well, officially, the date was the 17th of October 2012. And because it says so in LinkedIn, and you can find that out. So that's okay. And I think what happened is I just spent the most incredible summer over the Olympic Games in Stratford. And I'd really loved being a games maker. I'd spent 3 years applying for that process. I'd been a volunteer in different roles all across the Olympic Games. So I'd helped train up the games makers, and then I was a team leader games maker at the O2, or it was the North Greenwich Arena, because there was no branding allowed. And yeah, it was just the most incredible experience. And I'd been at home with the kids, as I said, and that was my starting point to saying, oh, I could go back to work now. I'm ready to do something. And the volunteering had definitely been my window into what was possible and what I was capable of doing. Because I think a lot of confidence was lost. I lost a lot of confidence over that time in terms of going back into the workplace. And so the volunteering was a perfect stepping stone for me. And LinkedIn became that perfect stepping stone for me to sort of start looking into the world of work again.
Love that. So you initially use LinkedIn to get back into the workplace. And then how have you used it as an entrepreneur? Because a lot of people that listen to this show are business owners. A lot of them are just starting out in their journey. So how did you tackle it once you went into entrepreneurship and you started running your own businesses?
Yeah, so I think what was great is I did go and work for this startup company, and part of my role there was marketing, and it was to help market the business, help to establish them into the environment, into their industry, and as a key player. And so I sort of took that learning and many of those learnings into my own business, and understood how to position myself and how to become visible, how to become credible, and how to look for those opportunities. There you go. I am quoting your book for you, Sam. Visibility and credibility.
Well, that sounds really familiar.
But it's so key. And I mean, why not advocate something that you absolutely have endorsed, because it works. And so for me, what I then did is, when I started to become my own business and create myself, or establish myself into the industry of life purpose, was a case of, okay, I just want to connect, I want to reach out, I want to find out what other people are doing, I want to understand people. That's for me the key, is to understand why people are doing what they're doing. And once I understand that, I can then understand how I can help them. And so for me, it was going into LinkedIn, and just having conversations, having lots and lots of conversations, one to one, one to many. It was just fantastic. And I think it's really underestimated in its power.
I totally agree with you. And I love the fact that you've gone in there with the mindset of I'm just here to have conversations, because I think so many people go into LinkedIn with the incorrect mindset. They go there to get and not there to give. And I know you're such a giver. Like you're one of those people that is all about relationships, all about helping others. And I think if you go into LinkedIn and the community with that mindset, you're always going to win. And I just see so many people doing it wrong. Would you agree?
I totally agree. And I think what I love particularly about LinkedIn for me is because I'm a podcaster, I'm having conversations with people on a one-to-one basis, and then those episodes get released. And so I don't have that engagement with my audience directly. So what LinkedIn enables me to do is to bridge that gap. It enables me to have the conversations with people about the conversations I'm having on the podcast. And that for me is fantastic. And people know that. I kind of have trained them from the start of that. This is how we can have these conversations. This is how you can reach me directly, and we can talk about what it is that you've taken from those episodes. And that's been amazing. And I think LinkedIn has been the right audience for me. It's been the sort of the right demographic of the people who are listening. And so it's just perfect. So they reach out to me on LinkedIn either on a DM, or because they know that I'm posting every single morning of that episode. They know my post is going to be there. So if they're an avid listener, and there are a few, they then go straight on and they comment on, just listen to this and this is what I've taken away. And so that's how my conversation starts.
I love that. So let's talk more in depth about obviously your podcast. We'll go into a little bit about that in a second. And I'm really interested to learn how you actually leverage platforms like LinkedIn and other platforms as well to promote your podcast. So your podcast is called Focus on Why. And I was really excited to be one of the very first people to be interviewed, even though at the time you had like zero audience. Tell us what your audience is now. Like, I know it's one of the top, top performing podcasts. So give us your stats. Where are you at the moment?
Well, we're 114 countries. I had got a new one just this week, and that keeps on going up. And it is in the top 1% of all podcasts out there, which just, is mind blowing. And for those who can see, this is what I do. I put a pink dot onto my globe, and there you can see.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So for the listeners that are not watching the video version, Amy is right now holding up this huge globe, and she's got a purple globe and it's got little pink dots all over the place where her podcast is being listened to. That's amazing. I love it.
It just puts it in context, Sam. It helps me
Yeah.
to recognize what I'm doing. And I actually sit on my underneath my chair on the floor is a massive map of the world. And it just grounds me to say I am part of everybody. Connectedness is one of my core values. And for me to feel connected with everybody who are listening to the podcast, who are then coming back to me and sharing what they've taken away, it just makes it, I can see it, I can feel it, and I can and just appreciate the work that I do is being received, and it's having those ripple effects. So to have that sort of tangible globe there where I can just see, okay, well, this is where people are. So when I'm recording my episodes, I feel like I can speak to them.
That is amazing. I love it. I'm going to start doing that. I'm going to steal that from you.
But in terms of answering your question, please do go to TK Maxx and get yourself a globe.
I'm totally doing that. So let's talk about how you actually leverage LinkedIn to promote the podcast, to get, to drive more listeners, to find guests, all of those things that us as podcasters have to do. So tell us a little bit more and break it down for everybody that's listening, because I know a lot of people that are listening either have a podcast or they are thinking about starting one. So how would you use LinkedIn to do that?
Okay, so my target audience, as I said, are midlife beginners, people who have had enough of living a life without conscious design, and they really want to focus on why they're doing what they're doing. They want to start living a life that's going to create impact and make a difference. And these tend to be business owners, entrepreneurs, senior level directors who are just fed up with status quo and realize that there is definitely more to life than is currently happening for them. So what it is I do is I speak their language. I am sharing with them episodes that will resonate. And the reason why I specifically keep it video, or off video rather, I keep it audio only, is so that people can use the the soundtrack, the audio as their soundtrack, and to play their own movie. So they can imagine what's going on for their own lives, but they can use what's being said on the podcast to picture what it is they want to do. So in terms of using LinkedIn, what I then do is I specifically have a format of the way that I describe each episode. And I start off with a grabber of a quote, something that somebody said on that episode. And then I introduce that context around what's going on and using intrigue. And so the people are like, oh, okay, this sounds really interesting. The keywords are there of what people might be looking for if they were going to search for an episode that covers this kind of content. And then it's a case of like, what's in it for them? What is it they're going to get out of this? And then questions, and I asking questions in the post. So that's my standard sort of set post that I would put onto LinkedIn. And I use images. So I'll use a quote for another different quote from that particular episode, or I'll have a very set template with how I picture the images, and I use great titles that will intrigue people into what that episode's about. That it's always a positively framed one, so it's what they're looking to achieve as opposed to where they were. So I focus on their desires as opposed to the pains, but the pains are in the content as well. It's where they were and where they now are. So I take people on a journey, and every episode and every single post is taking someone through that journey.
I love that. And do you use your featured section of your profile to promote your podcast as well, Amy?
I have used my feature section for some, but not all of them. So you're getting me thinking there that maybe I should be doing that more often.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be for every episode, but just a way for people to subscribe. So if you've got like a link, or if you've got a page where you send people where they can access the podcast, like I'd always recommend people have that within their featured section of their profile. There is also now the ability, which is quite a new feature on LinkedIn, it just came out in the last month or so, where you can actually put a link into the top of your profile as well. So I recommend people use that as some kind of lead magnet. But if you are a podcaster and that's the main thing you want to drive people through to, then adding that link with some text to say, listen to my podcast, with that kind of call to action on the profile can also help as well. That's another area I would definitely focus on as well. So content is obviously amazing for promoting a podcast, but that's another kind of little tip that you may not know about, Amy.
Yeah, no, thank you. Always, this is the thing about LinkedIn, is that you've just written your new edition of the book, and I'm sure already there are things in there you're like, oh, I need to get that in as well.
Literally, like every time we go to launch it and then they release something else, I'm like, no, I need to add that in. Like the funny reaction just came out, and the lead magnet on the profiles, and I'm like, I need to get that in before I release it. So yeah, so the Linked Inbound version 2 2022 edition is about to launch, so I'm super excited about that. In fact, by the time you listen to this, it might already be out. And I've got Linked Outbound, which I'm writing at the moment, like literally on this table whilst I'm here in Portugal. So that should be out by September. So I'm super excited about both of those coming out. So, and you've endorsed the new version, haven't you?
Oh, I have. How exciting is that? And I think it's just been such a special journey, Sam, the way that I know that you have a lot of people who read your book and who reach out to you, but for some reason we just clicked and it's just gone really well. And we've been to and fro. And I think it's that helping, there's always been a case of I've recommended or you've recommended people, and that it just has been reciprocal. So it's been fantastic.
That ripple effect again, Amy.
It is the ripple effect. And I think the other thing, going back to how to promote the podcast on LinkedIn, the best thing is when other people do it for me.
Exactly.
And that is, honestly,
all the raving fans.
Well, I wake up and one person recently, this happens a lot, but this particular person had listened to 12 episodes and she reviewed in an article all of them that she listened to. And you just think, wow, okay, now you get to a point where other people are promoting it for you. You know that there is value in what you offer.
Yeah, 100%. I love that when I wake up and I see like somebody's just found my book, or that, they found the podcast or something and they post in it and they tag you in it. And it's just really nice. And I just love getting all those messages. My inbox literally is, I think I get 5 to 10 messages a day, something like that, where someone goes, I'm reading your book. I'm on chapter 4, like I'm connecting like you asked me to.
So do you remember what you wrote when I can't
remember what I wrote. What did I write?
So I'd written to say that I was in this airport reading, and you went, "Ha ha, that's so awesome." I just love seeing posts like this. My book, Traveling the World with Great People Looking to be Inspired. It makes all the hours it took to write it totally worth it. Thanks for the mention, Amy. Much appreciated. Glad I was able to entertain you on your ski break.
Oh, but it was such a great picture, like the Alps and the book, and
Yeah.
like, you know, some people just posted like a literally just a picture of the book, and I was like, how cool is that? Like my book is like literally in the Alps right now. It's so
Yeah.
cool. I love it. I love it. Okay, perfect. So, what opportunities have come your way, Amy, as a result of you being more visible, more credible on LinkedIn and through the podcast as well? I guess what's happened for you?
It's taken me on an incredible journey, and to say it's changed my life sounds quite dramatic, and I honestly think it has. I think that reading your book and understanding LinkedIn more in how to engage with people really has been a significant piece for how I've put a put forward my whole image and who I want to be, how and projecting, that way of connection. And that for me has been really, really keen. I've formed some great friendships. I've discovered new communities, and being part of the Professional Speaking Association, we mentioned that earlier. A lot of people there are door openers, and so with LinkedIn combined, it has really given me some great opportunities, speaking opportunities, coaching clients. I've had people reach out to me who have never ever engaged in a single post and say, I want to go to work with you, and I'm like, I don't even know who you are. And I said, oh well, I know who you are, because they've been literally watching all my work, listening to all my podcasts, and then they're just ready to work with me. So it's been great. So I think that from that perspective, just really just following the steps that you said that you lay out in your book really clearly, and just applying them and being consistent. I'm always there. I love LinkedIn. It's an easy platform to navigate, and it's straightforward. So yeah, people almost expect to see me there, and so they kind of wait for those opportunities. They come there. I get DMs, and it's been great. It really has.
I love that. And that's really when you've kind of nailed your personal brand. Like you're really clear on who you are, you're really clear on your audience, you're crystal clear on who your ideal client is, and you speak their language, as you said earlier. And that's really when the magic starts to happen, right? You get your profile right, you get your messaging right, you get your content right. And this ripple effect, as we keep talking about, like people come to you ready to buy because they feel like they know you already. They've listened to your podcast, they've seen you on the newsfeed. And I always say to people, the magic is in the lurkers, like those people that are just watching. They never engage, they never like, they never comment, they never do anything on the LinkedIn platform with your posts. And suddenly they come out of nowhere, they inbound message you and they go, I'm ready to start working with you. And that's when you know you've nailed LinkedIn and you've nailed your personal brand, because if that's happening on a consistent basis, then you've totally got that. You've totally done everything that is the right thing to do when it comes to LinkedIn, for sure.
And I'm always tweaking it, Sam. I mean, I'm constantly changing it. I'm changing my profile, I'm changing the content. I'm always looking at how I can make sure that there's updated information there. And I think the using the testimonials as well is a great way. I reach out to people and leave recommendations, and vice versa. And when someone sends me a personal recommendation because they've been coaching with me, I just say, do you mind you copying and pasting that as a recommendation also on LinkedIn? So leveraging the different areas of LinkedIn, it makes a massive difference.
Yeah, for sure. We've just done with my academy members. I've got a social selling academy and we've got about 160 members in there. And I do a challenge with them every week. And this week we did a recommendations challenge because it's such an important part of building that credibility and that social proof. So I had them all go off and first off, give 5 recommendations to other people in their network. And then I had them go ask 5 people as well. And then they were to pick one of those recommendations and then create a piece of content about it and tag that person in it. And it just creates that constant social proof that you're really good at what you do, and that you're also willing to give as well, because giving and getting is just as important. So but yeah, recommendations, I'm just coming up on my 300th one at the moment, so I'm getting ready to do a post about my 300th recommendation, and then to celebrate that I think I'll do a podcast about recommendations, because it's such an important topic for sure. So tell me what you love. Well, we've kind of talked about what you love about LinkedIn. What would you change if you had a magic wand? Like if you could do anything differently with LinkedIn, what would you change about it?
If If you'd asked me that question about a month ago, I would have said we need a funny button, but it's just come, so I'm
Yay!
delighted. I think they maybe are shocked because I think a lot of people use LinkedIn for different ways of communicating, and sometimes a shock or just having those different emoticons would be a bit more flexible, so that you don't have to feel like you're squeezing into a particular area because it suits that. But I think that the way that LinkedIn is becoming more personal, I'm a big fan of. I think it's definitely shifting from being known as the job application platform into a way of connecting. And I found that the posts that I've put on there that have been more personal are the ones that have gone viral. There was one last year where my son had had a rugby accident, and I put it out there, not so that people could feel sorry for what had happened, but so that people could be informed about what to do if this happened to their son. And it was in, I mean, I forget to check now, but I think it was 170,000 views. And then, you know, people, maybe an empathy button, so maybe something more so, more connection. I don't know. Yeah, I think more emoticons would be good.
Yeah, I agree. And I'd love them to fix groups, because like groups just on LinkedIn are just a nightmare. And I'm sure they will at some point. I'm sure it's on their massive to-do list of getting things. But I really feel like, because LinkedIn is such a community-led platform, the fact that their own communities are so bad, I would love them to change the groups. I'd love them to be, you know, back like they were in the old days when they were very interactive and you could actually use them properly. But that's my little magic one thing I would love to fix. Okay, perfect. So I'm just going to ask you a couple more questions, Amy, just coming back to the podcasting side of things. So for anyone that wanted to think about getting into podcasting, or anyone that's either got one and they're just not getting traction, like what would be your top 3 tips for people starting out when it comes to podcasting?
So if they're using a podcast already, make it very clear how you can connect offline. So if they're listening to your show and they want to reach out and ask you questions, if you want to use LinkedIn as your go-to connecting platform, then perfect. But just make it really clear in the episode so that people then know, okay, well, that's where it's going to be posted, and let's have that conversation and continue that conversation. So make it clear that way. Have very clear takeaways about what is it that is going to be the thing that people are going to take away from that episode that they can then apply straight away, because it's not, you know, as they say, knowledge is of no use unless you apply it. So be very clear about what your podcast is about, who you're serving. And this is the same that would apply to how you're speaking to people on LinkedIn. And advocate or encourage people to post about your podcast. Say what it is that you found of value and how that it may help their audience, because if you can then take it into their space, move it away from your space but take it into their space, how is this episode going to help them and their key clients as well?
I love that. Amazing. And when it comes to helping people find their purpose and focusing in on their why, for somebody that's thinking, well, I just don't know what that means. Like, can you give a bit more clarity around how somebody might go to do that? Like, just, I know it's your kind of specialist subject, but if somebody is listening to this thinking, well, it's all well and good, Amy, saying like, focus on your why, get clear on your purpose. Like, how would somebody even start doing that?
Okay, so if you're feeling like you're standing at a crossroads and you're questioning what's going on in life, and whether you even need to have a life purpose, and you've probably got this fog that is blurring that visibility of the clarity to go forward, then you have to believe that you want things to change, that you have a reason that is bigger than you. And it comes down to the value you're going to add to the world, the contribution you're going to make. So quite often it could come from one or two places: something that really angers you and you want to make a difference in that space, or something that you're really passionate about and you want to make a difference in that space and you want to pursue it. And it doesn't have to be that it's your full-time job. It could be that you do this as a volunteer. It could be you do this as part of a role that you're doing. But with having clarity and with having a focus on why you're doing what you're doing, with that comes fulfillment. So it's a case of, do you want to feel as though you've made a difference? Do you want to live a legacy whilst you're, and I see that happen instead of just leaving it as something that's going to happen once you're gone. You can actually have that enjoyment and see it in reality right now.
I love it. So awesome. Amy, it's been amazing having you on the show. And just to one of your previous points, what is the best way for people to get hold of you and connect with you and reach out to you if they've enjoyed this episode?
Well, it would be odd if I said anything else than reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's Amy Rowlinson. That'd be perfect.
Amazing, Amy. Well, we'll put all your details into the show notes, of course. And I do want to say a massive, massive thank you for coming on to the show. I've been really excited. You've been on my list of people to interview for a good while now. So I'm very excited that you gave up your time for my listeners to be able to be here. So thank you so much, Amy, for being here. And I can't wait to see you again in person really soon.
Thank you, Sam.